Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is the second session of the season 2 of the Pacific Division Shelter and Capacity Building series. My name is Yi Wei. I am a volunteer from Los Angeles, and I am the Mass Care Program Lead in Los Angeles, and I'm also the division's training lead. And so last session, we did really, really great. We had 202 people, over 200 people attending across from the nation. Thank you so much for your support. We had a lot to cover last time. We will also have a lot to cover this time as well. Something for housekeeping. Number one is that this meeting will be recorded. The slides will be sent out afterwards, probably on a Monday. The recordings will get published on YouTube, and it will also be published on SharePoints. It's the link that I'll be sending out afterwards. For the YouTube channel is Pacific Division Red Cross that you can search, and all the past recordings are there as well. And I've muted everyone's mic and a camera for the time being for a better experience. And also that I'll open up the mic towards the end when we have Q&A sessions so you can ask your questions. You're also able to use the chat function to ask any questions that you might have. We do anticipate a lot of questions, and we've decided this time that we're going to hold the opening mic and answering questions towards the very, very end. And I also like to encourage you all to put your name in the chat, the regions that you're from in the chat, so we can all say hi each other. And let's get started. Roxanne and Jody.
Thank you so much, Yue. We are so thrilled to join you all once again and talk about one of our favorite topics of all time, being in a shelter, working in a shelter, helping people volunteer in a shelter, and helping our clients when they are in a shelter. And so thank you for joining us of part 2 of our what makes a great shelter service associate. And tonight we'll be discussing tips and tricks for working in the shelter itself. So let's begin. Last time we covered how to strive for a rewarding personal experience before and during deployment. And tonight we are going to be doing a dive into providing high quality and caring service for our clients in the shelter. But before we do that, I would really like to repeat something that we covered last week, and those are tips for a rewarding personal experience. And this is a list that I frequently look at before I deploy, when I'm deployed, and certainly as a checklist for to provide some good feedback for myself on what I could personally do better for next time. So these are really important, and it bears repeating. So again, understanding expectations, managing your own expectations, leaving assumptions and ego at home, definitely practice self-care, taking the initiative and asking questions, looking for opportunity to learn, and of course, make friends. So all of this is important before you deploy, and it's certainly important when you're working at the shelter. So let's get started. This is a portion of the shelter life cycle, the opening, operating, and closing of a shelter. And I would like to talk briefly about some of the general tasks that you might find yourself being asked to do in each of these 3 stages. So let's start with opening. Some tasks for opening a shelter. So it could be determining the shelter layout, unloading trailers, tarping the floors, assembling cots, and setting up the registration, common, dormitory, and feeding areas, and hanging signage inside and outside. Basically, you want to think about when you're being assigned to a shelter that is not yet open, you're basically going to be building the shelter. And so all of these tasks relate to setting that up for when clients begin to arrive. Next, let's talk about operating a shelter. This is going to be a bit more, this is when the shelter is up and running at full steam, and so the tasks are going to be a little different. So for example, you're going to be registering clients. You're definitely going to be assisting clients with their various needs. Cleaning the shelter. This is really important and it should be done on a regular basis. In my opinion, a shelter can never be too clean. Uh, this includes sweeping and mopping, sanitizing surfaces, emptying trash, and organizing common spaces. By keeping things really neat and tidy and super clean, it shows respect to the facility. It shows respect to our clients and our volunteers and everyone who's there. You also might be asked to take inventory of supplies and determine the needs for the next day. We'll speak more on that later. One of my favorite things to do is cleaning, assembling, and moving cots as needed. I don't know why I like it so much, but I do. Uh, this is a big one. You could be asked to assist with feeding duties. Now, yes, feeding does have its own separate group activity position, also known as a gap, but sheltering and feeding really are two sides of the same coin. And if you are in a shelter and you are a volunteer, you could be asked with sheltering and feeding. So I always go into a shelter, volunteer within a shelter with the mindset that yes, I'll probably be asked to do feeding at some point. And then, of course, organizing unsolicited donations if they are present. Uh, Sometimes it happens, folks really just like to donate, and there may be an issue of uh, learning how to organize, but also learning what the shelter policy is in terms of accepting donations and how to um, handle that accordingly. Uh, and then finally, tasks for closing a shelter. You may be asked to assist clients that are checking out, and clients, they may need help packing and cleaning and moving their belongings to transportation. Also, you may be asked to clean, disassemble, and pack up Red Cross supplies. This includes important documents, cots, kits, tables, etc. Anything that is the Red Cross supplies that we will need to pack up and move out of the facility. We also may be asked to load Red Cross trailers. So this is a very physical process. This is like picking up stuff and loading it into trailers. And there is there's an art to loading our trailers in terms of how they are packed and weight distribution and things like that. So it's not just pick it up and throw it in the back like you would if you were helping a friend move. It's there's a beautiful art to it. It needs to be done correctly so that logistics can tow the trailer safely to where it's stored, or even back to another location where they need to restock the trailers and things like that. We also are going to need to clean the facility, and personally, I always try to leave the facility cleaner than when we were granted use of it. Again, that shows respect to the facility owners for um, allowing us to use that space. And then, of course, another important task is to remove all the signage. You'd be surprised at um, how easily all of the signage that we have, kind of blends into the landscape, and you just end up not seeing it. And it's important that we make sure to remove all of it from the inside and definitely from the outside as well. Okay, so let's do a little deeper dive on some things. One of the most important things that we could do in a shelter, aside from taking care of our clients, is counting things. We track numerous items on a daily basis. Accuracy is very important, and this allows us to forecast, anticipate needs, share what services and items are being provided to headquarters, communities, and our partners and the media. And we may be asked to help complete daily inventories and ascertain what items are needed from our E3 fulfillment trucks. And counts include anything, but specifically, it is definitely clients, the number of new registrations in a day, pets, meals, snacks, cots, blankets, and comfort kits. And so let's talk a little bit more about client population counts. And this is a very, very important number that we need on a daily basis. Uh, the method that we use is counting heads in beds and occupied cots. Occupied cots means that there may not be a person actually in the cot, but you can definitely tell, and you have verified that their personal items that you see on the cot or around the cot are but they belong to a client that is currently staying at the shelter. Uh, it is important to note that counting registration forms will not give you an accurate population count. And that is because the registration book may not be up to date. So this means that one of the ways that this can happen is that folks may not tell the front desk that they are checking out. And so the people at the volunteers at the front desk may not know to remove that registration form and put it in a different binder. And so if you are wanting to get a population count and just counting all the registration forms, it's not really it's going to give you an inflated number. So the best method is heads in beds and verified occupied cots. Let's see here. And then the other important thing to note is to determine the number of new clients within a 24 period. The registration forms can be used for this particular account, and there are a variety of different methods that you could use to keep track of this. Some folks, they have a separate tally sheet that they will do hatch marks on to count the number of new registrations, and that is used by both day shift and night shift so that they can capture that number within 24 hours. Alternatively, uh, they can mark the the registration forms in the booklet, and then they can count those forms. But of course, that's only good for the 24 hours. So um, whichever method that you choose, make sure that your day shift and night shift knows that process. Um, and if someone is asking you to keep track of this, just make sure that you understand what they're asking you to do. And then lastly, you definitely want to triple check who is asking for these various counts. Sometimes a supervisor may be asking you to do this. Sometimes your supervisor is asking you to report that number to someone at headquarters, or you may hear a term FROST, and FROST is an acronym. And gosh, I am always going to get this messed up. It's I think it's field reporting.
It's Field Remote Operations
Remote.
Support Team.
Thank you. God, I always forget the R. Uh, this team is responsible for collecting all the population count numbers, and they compile a report that is sent to folks in headquarters and also uh, to folks nationally, depending on the uh, level of response. And so these numbers are really important to collect and make sure that they're accurate, and definitely they are expected at a certain time. So uh, do not be late in getting those. For me personally, if I'm in charge of making the counts within the shelter, I set an alarm. Actually, I set several alarms because I'm one of those folks that I hit a snooze button at least like 3 or 4 times. So I always have to kind of trick my brain. So, and then one of the best pieces of advice that I received, and I definitely share with other with my fellow volunteers, is always keep a small notebook on your person to record details and tasks and events, especially counts and things like that. And when I say on your person, I actually have it. It's small enough where I could stuff it in a pocket or in like a fanny pack. There have been times where I really wanted just like a big notebook, and I ended up just it never really I would always like leave it in the back office or something, and then I would have to try and figure out where it is. So if it's surgically attached to my person, then I'll always know where to find it. And then, as I mentioned before, setting multiple alarms is a really good way to make sure that you are on time with your reporting and where you need to be and things like that. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Jody, who's going to talk to you about some other fun stuff in the shelter. Jody?
Great. So actually, before I get started, I did want to share one of my tips. So when we were talking about doing the population count, one of the things that I learned over the years is that it's very difficult to get an accurate count when people are moving all over the shelter. So what I always do is I will go in and I will talk to people and I will say, look, I have to have this done by this time. So what I'm asking you is I need everybody to sit on their cot for 5 minutes while I get my count. And as soon as I am done with that, you guys are free to go. But at least for the 5 minutes, I really need your cooperation. And when we do our nightly meetings, right, with the clients, every night we reiterate this, and sometimes it may take them a couple nights or two, but people realize that we're really asking for their help just a very short amount of time. So most people are more than willing to sit down and let me do a head count real quick. Okay, so let's talk about the registration desk. And I personally consider the registration desk the most important part of the entire shelter. And this is because we are the guardians of our clients' safety and of their privacy. And our job is to make sure that only people who should be in that shelter, in that dormitory area, are the only ones that are allowed in. And this is really important because when disasters happen and there's a lot of chaos within communities, what happens is that there may be people who are looking for spouses or children or whomever, that there may be restraining orders or there may be other reasons that people don't want to be found. So it's really important, one, we never give any information. If somebody comes in and says, I am looking for my mother and her name is Jane Smith, and our job is to say, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I am happy to take your information and pass it along to the appropriate people. I'm a big fan of wristbands. I like wristbands because what that does is it's a very easy way to know, does this person belong in my shelter or not? And there have literally been times that I have brought my own wristbands to a disaster because sometimes they're a little difficult to find. And right, we usually try and strive for one color wristband for the clients that are staying inside the dormitory. And we are looking for another red wristband color that will indicate that you've got clients that are staying outside in perhaps tents or RVs, right? So what's really important, particularly for new SAs, is sometimes we're a little hesitant to say, does this person belong here? Or, who are you? Particularly when we're walking into a shelter that already is established, right? We may be the second or the third wave and we're coming in to take over for other shelter teams that have already left. Never be shy, never be embarrassed. Again, right, you are there to make sure that only the people that belong are there. So until you get to recognize clients, ask them, hi, I'm new here. Just checking, who are you, right? It's a very acceptable question. And maybe you want to grab the registration book. Hey, my name is Jane Smith. If the registration book is there, I can confirm it that way. Or perhaps I need to grab my supervisor to help confirm. What you may occasionally run into is people may try to use a bit of intimidation, bully their way in a little bit. So if you are unsure about something, right, the proper response is, could you just wait 1 second? I just have to grab my supervisor. Particularly because media, we need to talk real quick about media. Media is very important for a lot of reasons, and we have a good relationship with the media, be it television or newspapers. But what may happen on occasion is that you may get some of these, I'm going to say freelance reporters that come in, and I have literally had somebody try and kind of just walk by me at the registration desk, and somebody might not think to ask, hi, can I help you? Because they walk in like they own the place, right? So again, it's very important that we ask every individual until we get to know our clients, hi, may I help you? Who are you? Who are you looking for? Right? Again, remember, your job at that desk is to make sure only people who belong in your dorm area are there. The other thing is we want to encourage clients good habits as far as signing in and signing out. If somebody walks outside and they're going to have a cigarette, that's not a problem. But if they're leaving for work or school or shopping, or they're going to work on the house, right? They are leaving the shelter and the property. We want them to sign out. When they return, we want them to sign in. If anybody ever gives you any problems, the best and true answer is, look, I need to know who is here in the case that there is any type of emergency at the shelter. I need to make sure that everybody is accounted for. Again, sometimes people will grumble, but when you start talking about their safety and the safety of your families, people will cooperate. Next slide, please. All right, this is one of my very favorite things, and I really cannot stress this enough. Learn clients' names. It's the best way to start establishing those relationships, and in order to help you engage in conversations with people. If you're in a really small shelter, you may be able to know everybody's name. But if I'm in a shelter and there's 200 or 500 people, that's not possible. What is possible is that I know the names of 6 or 8 or 10 of my clients, and I use their names, right? When I come in, or I'm leaving shift, or I'm just doing whatever I'm doing throughout the day, say hi to someone, have a conversation. Hey, John, how's it going today, right? What that does is that lets our clients and their families and their friends know that we see them as something more than just a statistic, right? The news media may say, hey, there are 250 clients in this particular shelter, but we know within that population, right, there's Mary and there's Jane and there's Mark and there's Jack, right? So they're not just a statistic to us. And that's a way that we are conveying to people that we see them, that they are important to us, right? So always try and do that. Again, it helps build cooperation, and I'm really short for anyone who doesn't know me. And so I always end up, trying to pick the garbage can, empty the trash can, this big old bag to which is, maybe as tall as me. So it's the opportunity I'll go over and say, hey, John, could you help me with this? If people feel that you really know who they are, they want to help, right? They will step forward with whatever you're asking. And really important, teenagers, right? It's a lot easier to engage with children and adults. Teenagers have the, a lot of times they're kind of plugged in and tuned out, right? They're on their phones, they're on their iPads. So we may need to make a concerted effort to go over and try and engage with them. And part of what you're doing also by getting to know people is that you can help identify if something doesn't look right or just feels off. Particularly, let's say you were talking to a teen a couple days ago and all of a sudden they're very sullen and they're very withdrawn, which seems out of character, right? Because I've already got this relationship. I may walk over to health services or mental health and say, hey, could you do me a favor and just check on this kid over here, right? Part of what you're doing is, as a shelter worker interacting every day with your clients, you are also the eyes and ears to help us identify any potential problems that shelter manager may be doing 100 other things, right? Doesn't see the clients and interact with them the same way. So you have that opportunity to make sure that if we see something that is off, we want to make sure that we address it. Next slide. Very important, all right? It's okay to say, if somebody asks me a question and I don't know it, I'm the first one to say, I don't know, but I'll find out that answer. And it's always a right to not know the answer, particularly when you're just starting out. But you need to be really careful, right? We get ourselves in trouble when somebody asks a question and somebody will be walking by and they will kind of like flippantly give an answer and not think anything about it without checking to see, did what I say, was that accurate? Because many times that may come back and bite you. Well, but so-and-so told me this. So make sure that you are conveying accurate information. If you tell a client that you're going to find something out for them, it's your responsibility to follow through with that. If I am getting ready to out process and I told Mrs. Smith that I was going to come back with an answer on something and I still don't have that answer, then I need to talk to my supervisor or the shelter manager and write something down and say, look, I haven't been able to get this answer for her yet. Could you please make sure that someone does? It's very important that we close the loop, that clients feel that we are hearing them, that they are important, because there is nothing more frustrating or upsetting to a client than walking up to a shelter worker and say, hey, I was wondering what time Mary's coming in, and someone says, oh, Mary went home, but she was helping me work on this, right? So now you've got to start all over, right? So we always have to put ourselves in a client's shoes. If you make a commitment, you say you're going to get an answer, you have to make sure that you do it, because our trust is always built on following up and following through with what we say. Next slide, please. Pets in shelters. It's getting to be some of our very favorite subjects. Most important thing that we always remember is that service animals are not considered pets. They are allowed anywhere in the shelter, and an animal may show up. Somebody may tell you, oh, this is my service dog or my service miniature pony, the only type of two animals that are considered service animals. And really the only question we can ask is, what task does your service animal provide for you? Red Cross is finally coming around to the idea that, look, pets are clients too. Pets are part of our clients' families. And we're in the past, we really, our attitude is that we don't have pets in shelters. The organization has finally started re-looking at this and realizing that if we're truly going to take care of clients, that includes their pets as well. So I'm really excited. There was a new position that was really rolled out in Florida as a pet liaison. And the pet liaison position is somebody that is deployed on the ground. They will be having conversations with shelter managers to see what are the pet's needs. They will be going by to visit, right? Working on relationships with local organizations that help us, ASPCA and the Humane Society. And they also have recently hired a new program manager at national headquarters. And her responsibility is the whole program, designing it, helping to come up with doctrine. How are we going to make these relationships with counties and states and organizations work? So there's a lot of stuff that will be coming, and it's not a short fix. But to me, the best part is the fact is we are saying, okay, we need to make a commitment to take care of the pets as well. And the shelter manager and the pet liaison are going to develop those close relationships because, right, if there's a problem, the shelter manager is going to call the pet liaison, or the pet liaison is going to come by and say, hey, how's it going? Right? Very important. So I'm like really excited about this. It's very, very important. One of the new things that we have started tracking is the number of pets. They are reported in our population counts, the same as people. Count and report them by species. How many dogs? How many cats? I think I've had a few iguanas, goldfish, and snakes. Right? So we want to make sure that we are specifying how many of each species. Next slide, please. Next slide. Is it stuck? Thank you. All right. Best volunteers, the best volunteers in any activity, any gap, are those who are self-motivated, right? Those are the volunteers that see something and they don't wait for someone to give them a job, right? Trash cans are overflowing, or somebody spilled something over there, right? You see something, you take the initiative to handle it. You see a client that looks like they might be feeling a little bit blue, you're going to walk over and see if you can engage with them as well. It's really important that there are so many things the shelter manager and the supervisor may be working on at the same time. And if you stand around waiting for somebody to give you a specific task, right, you may be frustrated because somebody hasn't quite gotten back to you. Me personally, I don't sit well, right? I never did. And so I always loved walking around, finding things that I can do, right? And it may be something as easy as I'm wiping down the tables and I'm wiping down the chairs, or you know, I'm just checking in with clients, right? Sit down and have a conversation. If you're assigned a housekeeping task, right? Let's say I say, hey, could you go over and mop the floor? And you know, you go to get ready to do it and you look and there looks like there is a client that something's just not right. Maybe they're sad, maybe you can just tell something's off. You can always come back to mopping that floor, but you take that time and go and sit with the client and say, how are you doing? Right? Because taking care of our clients is our very first priority. We absolutely have to have our shelters organized and clean and sanitized, right? But being there for your clients so they know that they matter, that's your first priority. A lot of times you've got moms that are in the shelters, they've got multiple, you know, young kids. Sometimes the dad's lucky, right? And he's still able to go to work. And so you've got this mother stuck at the shelter with a couple kids, and you can see she is stressed, right? So grab one of your shelter teammates and say, hey, you know what, how about we'll watch the kids for a couple minutes. Why don't you, you know, go eat your lunch, or why don't you step out front, or do you need a few minutes, you know, for whatever she would like, and give that mom a break for a couple minutes. And this is not something that just applies to the women. Guys, step it up, right? I've run into this problem on occasion too, where the guys, part of the shelter team, well, no, I don't do that kind of thing. Absolutely you do, right? Anybody can sit and spend a little bit of time with the kids, right? So give that mom a break. You will be surprised on how much it will just mentally recharge her. Okay, Roxanne and I love this. Think like a supervisor. Look around. Is there something that needs to be done? Do it. Is there something that you see and you think, you know what? Maybe I have a better way that we can do this instead of the way that we currently are, right? Don't be shy. Go up and talk to your supervisor. That's not to say that something is going to get put into place immediately with your suggestion, but it may be something that we can look at and go, wow, you know what? That's a good idea, and that's going to save us time, right? So sometimes coming in with a fresh set of eyes, particularly if you're walking into a shelter that is already up and running, right? Because the craziness of getting the shelter up and running, we don't always see that. But do it respectfully, right? Make sure that when you go up and you say, hey, I have a really good idea I wanted to talk to you about, you're presenting it in a respectful way that it doesn't sound like, wow, you guys are totally messed up here. I got the answer, right? So do it the right way. But if you've got a suggestion that's going to help us out, generally, I'm telling you, I'm like, I totally like that, right? Because I may be missing something because I'm seeing the bigger picture. The other thing is, right, shelter supervisors and managers, we want our SAs, we want you guys to be excited, and we want you to be engaged, and we want you to feel that you are doing something important, because you are. So if you've been sitting at the registration table for 3-4 hours, right, and your supervisor or shelter manager walks by, say, hey, you know, I was wondering, I'd really like to work in the dorm area, or I'm really interested, could I help with the meals? I'm interested on exactly how do we do this? Snacks, water, meals. Absolutely. Or maybe you're the person who is sitting at the registration desk and you really like that function. So if I walk by and say, hey, how's it going? Do you want to try something new? Tell me, no, you know, I really like this and I'd like to stay here. That's never a problem. Like I said, personally, I don't sit well. And so for me to sit at an 8-hour, 12-hour shift in the registration table, that doesn't work. But there's a lot of people that I know who love working registration table, right? Our objective is just to make sure that you guys feel that you are learning all the different areas within the shelter, right? You get the opportunity to try everything. Also, look for other shelter SAs or shelter SVs that seem to have a really good idea of what they're doing, right? And shadow them and say, hey, can I hang out with you? You know, I want to kind of learn what you know or what you're doing. Every shelter is going to have its own nuances, but there are specific things that apply across the board, right? So if you see somebody and it seems like they might be someone good to hang out with, talk to them, and trust me, they will be flattered. And lastly, right, have a phone a friend or a shelter pal back home in your region. Sometimes, you know, maybe you come across a question or a concern and maybe you don't want to go to your supervisor, right? We've all been there. Have someone you can call and bounce an idea or just vent to. Trust me, I have my list of phone a friends and I use them because I don't always know the answer, or sometimes I may just be frustrated and they just want to talk to somebody about it, right? So phone a friends are one of the best things that Roxanne and I can recommend. Make sure that you've got people's phone numbers in your phone. I've had a couple of people who have put them in their wallets and then something happens and they don't have it. Next slide, please. All right. This is a really, really important one. So when we deploy, and one I really want you to take to heart, when we deploy, we are making the decision that we are going out because we want to help people who have been through a tragedy or a trauma, right? And we go out and we do our very best to take care of our clients, to let them know that we are there for them and that we care, right? And we always treat our clients the same way that we would hope somebody would treat our family if the situation was reversed. But what you need to remember is that you may hear stories that are really heartbreaking. You may bond with clients and build these rapports that feel very deep. But what you have to learn to do is when you leave that deployment, you need to be able to leave those things at the deployment. All right. You cannot do your best when you go out the next time to help people who have been through a disaster if you're still carrying around baggage from previous disasters. All right. And if you need someone to talk to, our disaster mental health, they are amazing. And they're here not just for our clients, but they are here for all of us volunteers and employees. You know, there's employees out there working as well. That's what they are there for. And make sure that you know you can go to them and let them help you process maybe things that you've heard or maybe things that you have seen, right? Their job is to help you work through these things. And that way, when you get the next call and they say, hey, do you want to go out next time? I'm ready to go. But you have to be able to sort of compartmentalize what you have seen or heard or done on one operation, and then you go to your next operation, being able to give it 100%. Next slide, please. The more you know, the better volunteer you are. You can sort of look at the organization as we're like a giant puzzle, and there's a lot of different pieces that fit together. Sheltering is one small part of what we do and who we are. So the more classes and the more training that we take, the more well-rounded volunteers we are, and the more we will understand how we fit into the big picture. As Roxanne mentioned before, right? We consider if you're a shelter worker, you should absolutely be taking feeding fundamentals to have an understanding of how does this work. At one time, we used to, have teams that were specifically out at the shelter, and their job was, that's what they did, right? They did the feeding, we did the sheltering. Things have changed, and so both of these jobs have become more integrated, right? So as a shelter worker, right, I may have dinner dropped off, and then my team and we're responsible for serving it and cleaning it up. Well, it's important that if I'm going to be dealing with feeding, I need to understand what are the temperature requirements, what type of process is required for cleaning things, right? I'm not just throwing it in a thing of water, right? So if you are in sheltering, we really, really strongly advise you to do feeding fundamentals. Also, take a look at what else mass care classes are out there that you might be interested in, because not every disaster is going to require sheltering. Or maybe they bring up sheltering and it's only up for a short amount of time. So if you are multi-trained, let's say you've got a gap in distribution of emergency supplies or disaster assessment, or one of many others, government ops, right? If a disaster comes up, you still can get deployed, though it is not necessarily in sheltering. Now, if you know me, you know that's exactly where my heart is, and that's always the first thing that I'm interested in doing. But I have other gaps. So if there's nothing open in sheltering, I still can go out and feel like I'm making a contribution and helping people. I just may get called for one of my other gaps. Next slide, please. All right, and Roxanne covered these. We just want to kind of close with this. We really want volunteers to have realistic expectations, right? You already know that you're looking at 12-hour shifts, maybe a few minutes more because you come in a couple minutes early before the pass down between night shift comes to you on day shift, or vice versa, right? We talked about night shift is a great shift We encourage everybody to do this. If you really, really want to develop those relationships and get to know your clients, night shift gives them the opportunity that you don't get on day shift, right? I've worked shelters where I've had more Red Cross volunteers there during day shift than clients. Okay, but nighttime, your clients will be there. We talk a little bit about standby teams. So you may come out and you may be put on a standby team. And what that means is I'm not immediately sending you out to a shelter. I have you there in the case of something happens and they call me up and say, we want a shelter set up in this location and you've got less than 2 hours to do it. I've got a team that I can call up and say, okay, you guys, you need to head there now. All right. So standby teams are very, very important. And generally what I try to do is if I've got a team and let's say you've been on standby for several days, what I'll try and do is I will try and rotate people out, meaning I will take that standby team, I will send them to work in a shelter that's open, and I will pull some of the people in the shelter and I will now put them on a standby team. Right? So we're trying to make sure we're still giving you the experience of working in a shelter as well. But please understand, standby teams are imperative to the success, particularly when we are talking about things like wildfires, or we just had all of our floods in California. I had to have 1 to 2 standby teams available every night. Like Roxanne was saying, we have a lot of housekeeping activities that we do. A lot of it is physical activity. Please make sure before you deploy that you can do the job that you are coming out for. All right. Working in the shelter, there's a lot of things we're doing. You know, if you're somebody who mopping or cleaning or whatever, that maybe you have some physical limitations, talk to workforce, right? Let's have a conversation. Let's make sure that you are prepared and you can do that job. Right, you may be helping with meals and snacks and water, and you may be asked to help do the daily counts and those inventories. And those actually doing those inventories and counts, that's actually a really good experience to get under your belt because it helps you start to learn how do we forecast, how do we determine what needs that we have. Interactions with clients, that's the best part of sheltering. I once had somebody in a shelter I took over, and she handled all of our unsolicited donations. And I happened to be short one day. Somebody called in sick, and so I wanted to bring her inside, and she says, "Oh no, I don't do people." And I said, "But you're in sheltering." And she said, "Yeah, I know, but I don't really like people." So if you're working in sheltering, right, you've got that special personality, right? You can talk to anyone and you can engage people. That's what makes this such a great thing to do. And make sure hardship codes, Roxanne talked about those last week. Hardship codes are real. You need to review them, you need to give thought to them, and you need to make sure if I deploy, do I understand that I may be in this situation? The biggest one we run into is that people may have medical equipment, and if we don't have power, I don't have a way for your CPAP to work, right? Or, you know, we may be sleeping in staff shelters predominantly, right? So make sure that you look at those hardship codes, and if you're not sure, make sure that you ask those questions. Next slide. And that's kind of it. I love her Kawaka. So if there are any questions that popped up in chat, that might be a good time. Or any comments?
Thank you so much, Jody and Roxanne. And before we open up to questions, I have several announcements to make before I forget. So I just posted on Teams chat, Mask Your Webinar. We have some people mention Mask Your Webinar is a great place for us to get information. That is absolutely correct. So it happens on every third Thursday of the month, and it's 2 o'clock Eastern time, so it's about 11 o'clock Pacific time. That I encourage you to join. And if you don't have the time that particular time, you can always watch the recording. The recording is available right afterwards. You're able to join the mailing list so that you can get reminders for joining that. The other thing that I want to make announcements for next week and for the upcoming sessions. Next week, we still welcome Jody and Roxanne to talk about how to be a great shelter supervisor. Some of you might think that, well, I haven't even deployed. I'm not even a service associate or never deployed as service associates. Why would I join a class that is going to talk about supervisor? Well, one of the big things that we like to do in Red Cross is field promote. So when we don't have enough personnel on the ground, we might promote you to a supervisor, till that we find a person that is qualified to be a supervisor. So I encourage all of you to attend, whether this is your first time or if this is your 10th time, that, I encourage you to attend. We did get some questions. So we talked about pet situation, and we talked about whether we report the numbers for the pet, for service animals. Jody or Roxanne, would you like to touch that?
Yes, actually, we do report service animals now. We hadn't when we started, but in fact, I had a conversation this afternoon with the new person at National who will be taking care of, right, program manager for pets. And we talked about that. And one of the reasons that we're reporting the number of service animals, so we can make sure, are these service animals okay? Is anybody sick, or are there any needs? The same way that we would for regular pets, right? Does the service animal have what it needs? A kennel, a leash, a collar, food? Is maybe somebody's service animal sick that we need to make arrangements for a veterinarian? So we absolutely count them as well.
So Jody, could you touch a little bit on where would we report that?
As Roxanne was kind of saying earlier, so you're going to need to find out who your numbers are being reported to. Somebody may ask you to do the pet counts, and you need to confirm, are you giving those numbers to your supervisor, or are you turning it into the shelter manager? Every DR seems to be processing a little bit different. So the shelter manager is going to have to make that determination.
Got it. And the reason I'm asking is because we do have I also put it in the chat as well, that we have a household pets guidance doctrine, and it says that it was only for pets. We only report pet numbers, and we don't report service animals because service animals are not considered pets. And that's the reason that I want to make sure that we're on the same page. So if you mentioned that new guidance are coming out, I think we'll be just look forward for the new guidance. I've unmuted everyone. Well, not unmuted everyone. That if anyone wants to come off mute to ask any questions, that you're welcome to ask questions. We still have 7 minutes remaining.
Wow, that's a first.
No, it's not a first. I have a question or a comment, actually. It's my understanding that Frost wants a head count and a pet count for both inside the shelter and outside the shelter. Is that so?
Correct. Well, as best as we can get. So inside counts for both clients and pets is pretty easy to get. Outside populations can be trickier. Their ask is that, yes, if we could report, the numbers as accurately as possible. Part of that has to do with getting the cooperation of clients. All right, so we do our very best on our outside populations for both clients and their pets as well.
Do we have any other questions?
If you're on deployment and you're on a standby team, what are you doing when you're on a standby team for a couple of days? What are you actually doing?
You know what? That can depend. Sometimes we've actually had standby teams and we've, maybe distribution of emergency services, maybe they need help. So maybe somebody else needs help for a little bit. We may have a standby team there. During the floods that we had recently, I had a standby team up in Sonoma where we also had a shelter and a shelter team. So we took that opportunity for the standby team to do some training. And there are times, particularly if we're sending a standby team maybe to a more remote location, that you may be hanging out in a hotel or a different facility. But what I always tell people is, these are the times that you have the opportunity to go online and take training and take classes, right? If you are on standby for a couple days and I didn't have anything for you to do yet, could you sit with your paperback? You could, right? But you also could take that opportunity to take some classes that are online, right? That may, again, help you get additional gaps for other activities. So like I said, we try and rotate people for standby teams because we understand that it's not the first choice any of us want to do. But it's important to keep the perspective of why we have to have standby teams. Because literally, if I have to set something up at 2 in the morning and I don't have a standby team, I've got a problem. So use that time to your advantage.
Jody, I have a follow-up question. If you're on standby, are you able to go out and party or, drink some alcohol, wine, margarita? Are you able to do that?
Gee, thanks. Want to pop in, Roxanne? All right. So you have to be reasonable, right? Even if you're not on a standby team, even if I'm a shelter team, right? I've worked my shift. If I get off shift and I'd like to go out and have a glass of wine, right? I've taken off my vest. I don't have my Red Cross t-shirt on, right? I can do those things. Same thing if you're on a standby team, right? And you want to go out and you want to have a beer. Again, I'm not in anything that marks me as Red Cross. Yes, you can do that. What you need to give thought to is, even if you're not in that Red Cross marked gear, right, you are still there to be available in the case of I need to call you at 1:30 in the morning. So you need to give thought, right? Going out and partying and have a few drinks. If I call you at 2 in the morning, are you going to be ready to roll? So, a lot of this, I think, is our personal choices, and you need to remember why we're actually there. This is not a vacation. This is not a party. I am here on standby because if this fire jumps the road, they're going to have 10,000 more evacuations. And guess what? I'm opening up a shelter.